Me now, excellent. I'm glad you all could make it here to my program on how to make your own beer. That's tomorrow night. I'm Craig Bacon. I'm the Deputy Niagara County Historian. I've been the Deputy Historian for the last 11 years, hopefully for as long as I want to keep on doing it. I love the job. Favorite job ever. Greatest job. So I was asked to do a program, and I decided to do one on the Erie Canal in Niagara County, where traces of the old canal can be found, which is fitting because tomorrow is the 191st anniversary of the opening of the canal across its entire length, October 26th, 1825. 192nd, sorry. So I have traces of the old canal, and then Carol said, well, what can we do that's genealogy? So added on to the end of my program that I did for another group a while ago, I added the genealogy of the canal bridges across the county. All the county canal bridges, some people call them the Wruck Road Bridge or Pearson Road Bridge, they were all named after families, and so I've added that onto the end. So that's where genealogy is going to come in. So before the Erie Canal, what was the best way to get across the country? First of all, we were the Wild West. We were the great unknown at the western end of the western edge of the whole continent. For really, there was nothing else going on for the big part in the middle, for Europeans anyway. A lot of narrow roads. This is an actual road that went from Canandaigua up to here, and part of it still exists, though most of it is now what they call the Lewiston Road. Before the War of 1812, this area was significant because of Fort Niagara. Whoever controlled Fort Niagara controlled the whole Niagara frontier. So there was a military reason to have an easy way to get troops back and forth across the state. And you couldn't go through the lakes because there's a big drop or a wall, coming from Lake Ontario to Lake Erie. You can't get up that wall. So they had to figure out a way to get into the lakes another way. So in the early days, I wish I had a pointer. You could just see Batavia. It's red all the way up to Fort Niagara, green going back to Canandaigua. That was the main route to get across New York State. Canandaigua was a pretty populated area. It was the capital of Ontario County. Yeah, there we go. I feel like an old school teacher. Yes. Everyone listen. So this was the main route, and we still have that route. If you go down Cold Springs Road, 77 basically, until you get to Cold Springs, and then you go up Cold Springs Road, and then Old Niagara Road. That follows all the way out to Fort Niagara. That was, they call it the Lewiston Road or the Old Fort Road. There's a little bit of a closer look for it. You can see Cold Springs is actually listed on the map. It doesn't say Lockport, it says Cold Springs. And that's from Joseph Ellicott map of 1800. And before the War of 1812 and stuff, Fort Stanwix in Rome, you could go a water route up the Mohawk River, but then you would have to portage over to the lake, and then you got over to the lake, you had to portage back up. So it's kind of hard to move anything, especially troops. And I don't know if you knew this, the canal's primary reason was not to get goods back and forth. They can tell us that now. It was to get troops back and forth. Same thing with the thruway system. Thruway system wasn't built for your ease or my ease. It was built to get troops back and forth across the country.
We're always last.
Yeah. So the man with the mission was Jesse Hawley. You, right back here, you could be Jesse Hawley. You kind of look like him. He wrote a series of articles in the Genesee Messenger while he was in jail because he couldn't pay his debts. In those days, you went to debtor's jail, and you worked off your debt that way. But what he noticed was, if you're trying to get into the interior of the country, there's this long mountain range that's in the way. You have to go up and over. However, here, if New York City down here, there's this valley, and then another one across where the Mohawk River comes through. It allowed for easy access into the interior of the country. Sure, down in Tennessee, there was a Cumberland Gap and stuff. You still go up and over the mountains. The rise here was much more easy to overcome. And it was the only natural break in the Adirondack chain. So it started in Rome. I took this picture. I took my kids to Rome, New York 5 years ago because I wanted them to know where the canal began, and it's where they first dug it. You'll see at the very end is a round pond. It's very nondescript. You would never know that this is where the Erie Canal, the first shovel was turned. They call Rome the summit route. It's downhill this way and downhill that way. It's not the highest point on the canal, but it is the summit route. The water flows in both directions there. And here's the picture. It's hard to see. We could turn off like one set of lights maybe. There we go. It's a wet spot right outside the New York State cheese factory. We have a cheese factory in New York State. And it's around, it's probably about 20 feet around, and that is where the first spades of dirt were turned for the Erie Canal. Looking at the whole profile across the state, here's the Mohawk River Valley. See, there's quite a bit of elevation change, but still nothing like compared to going over the entire mountain range. And it goes back down, comes back up, and here's Lockport. There are 5 steps here. There's a closer view of it there. So why did they dig the canal all the way across New York State? Most people think, wouldn't it be easier to go up to Syracuse and then up to Oswego and then use the lake and then a short canal back over here? The problem was we had just finished a war with Great Britain. And Canada, while it says Canada here, is still a territory of Great Britain. And warships on Lake Ontario would be able to upset any trade that was going on by going through here. Later they did add in the Oswego Canal, and they talked about digging a canal called the Niagara Canal here, but they never did it. Instead it's in Canada. But in order to maintain safety of ships that were coming across New York State, they kept it all inland and off of Lake Ontario. By 1823, the deep cut was all that was left to be dug. And everyone knows the deep cut, about 3 blocks directly to the south of us. And when we look at it today, it's 147 feet wide, 148 feet wide from wall to wall. When they first dug that canal, that deep cut was 55 feet wide and the walls are 40 feet tall. So it was like literally going into a tunnel. I don't think we can fathom that today. When we go in there now, it already seems like it's enclosing in on us, but think of how it was 3 times as small and the walls are still just as high. All cut without dynamite, all black powder. And they had to, what we did in Lockport was come over the Niagara Escarpment. The Niagara Escarpment runs from Wisconsin all the way up through into Canada and all the way back down. It doesn't show it going all the way. This is about Rochester, but it actually comes out just west of Syracuse. But that's your major part of the Niagara Escarpment. The highest part is around Niagara Falls in this area. They have in Canada what's called the Bruce Trail, which runs along it also, which is a really beautiful trail if you get a chance to hike on it. It's really cool. Some other views of the escarpment. This is, you see Niagara Falls in the background, the escarpment here, and this is Niagara River, looking back towards Lake Erie back here. Problem in Lockport was the Lockport dolomite was really, really hard to get through. It was not an easy job to cut that 7-mile gorge, which is the deep cut, and cutting the 5 locks. When they first were digging the locks, the reason they chose that spot, there were several locations in mind. There was Cold Springs, right near where the cemetery is. There was here, where the locks are, and then out right across from Harrison's is another area they talked about it. One of the Comstock brothers, 5 Comstock brothers, came to Lockport, and they were land speculators, and they owned one brother owned all the land right around where the locks ended up being. He was convinced that they were going to be out by the Harrison area at the head of the Gulf, so he sold all his land to his brother and bought the land out there. And then when they chose this path, he said, and he moved to North Dakota. Which is why there's a Niagara, North Dakota, by the way. Interesting story. When they were going out to North Dakota, there was no train stop for what ended up being Niagara, North Dakota. So the train engineer would slow the train down when they got to their property. They had to jump off. Same thing if they wanted to get back on. They had to, until they built a station, the train would slow down enough for them to jump on and jump off. You get arrested for that today. Can't be a hobo. So there's this lithograph that was made of them digging the deep cut here. One of the reasons why they dug the locks where they're at is there was a natural waterfall there already. One of the branches of 18 Mile Creek flowed over there, so it cut it. So it made it a little bit easier to dig through it. Now, when you get to the top of the locks, you are at the level you need to be for Lake Erie water to flow. However, because of that hump of solid rock behind it, they had to cut straight through. There was a possibility they could go up another set of locks to the very top of that hump and then another set down at the other end, but there's no ready water source at the top of that hump, so they dug it straight through to make it level with Tonawanda Creek at the other end and then Lake Erie. I think it's so many feet per mile it has to drop, but when you get to the top of the locks out there, you're at the level you need to be. But if you're out to the locks, it's probably another 25 feet to the top of the escarpment. There's a heck of a drop there still, so it was quite an undertaking. I'm moving around to get more steps. So I was talking about how the walls were 30 feet high and this was really narrow. This kind of gives you a view of that. Towpath is really high off the canal there. I don't know if you can see how high it is. One of the very few places in the entire canal you can still see the 1825 towpath is here in Lockport. When they enlarged the canal, they didn't blast this side of the wall again. They blasted only on this side and left the towpath in place, so they have to rebuild it again. So that's one of the few places that the towpath still exists in its original 1825 configuration. There's some others out in the eastern part of the state. I could put a program on that too, because I've been from one end of the canal to the other, exploring in the woods. In Lockport, we had a very unique situation. We had two sets of locks, one for upbound traffic, one for downbound traffic. I don't know what the numbers of the original locks were, but now they're 67 through 71 for the Flight of 5. It's kind of a misnomer on the sign coming in the city, home of the original Flight of 5 locks. They were destroyed in the 1830s, 1839, when they rebuilt the new locks. The set that's still there was built in 1841 and first used in 1842. The second set took a little bit longer because there was work stoppage. It was completed in 1849. What they did was, they tore all the locks away on one side when they enlarged it, and used the stone that was there to start rebuilding, and then quarried more stone. And they used one set. One set was always open at a time, so that canal traffic was not disrupted. But they used the double set here in Lockport because there's so much traffic that they didn't want people to have to wait in both directions. As it was, the average wait time in Lockport in 1832 was 3 days. Which is why there were a lot of bars up here. Sailors like bars. Lithograph again of the original upbound and downbound set. You can see this is probably around 1830-31. There's a pretty big town all of a sudden popping up around these locks. When you have people stopping in your community for that long of a time waiting to go through the locks, a lot of commerce happened here. You would unload, if you want to carry anything anymore, you unload here and sell it here. A lot of boatmen, when they got to Lockport, if they got towards the end of the season, they ended up stuck here all winter. Built some great houses on Market Street later on.
Right, I've never actually seen this view of the locks, and I'm used to seeing a different view where they kind of show the buildings, like where Old City Hall is and stuff. So this must be before they actually even built that building?
Old City Hall would be right about here.
Okay, so it's not there yet then?
No.
Okay, that's really cool.
This is really early.
Yeah,
this is really
it's
early.
really cool.
And this is Spalding's. These are Spalding's mills here. If you know the story about the water power and Lyman Spalding, there was a raceway that ran through here and powered these buildings. He bought the property and built these buildings figuring he could just use the water power for nothing. Well, someone else bought the water rights, and it was a major mess. He went bankrupt at least 4 times trying to recover the water rights. So here's a little bit later. There's your, that's the, they call it the electric building now. The top couple stories have been torn off and it's flat on top. That's where they used to do little concerts up there, and right next to the parking ramp would have been right here. Boats are waiting. And you can see the town's built up. There's a couple churches, one there, one there. There's the county courthouse that's right there. And some hotels up on Main Street. And you can see this right here. This is one of the waterways that goes around. They just started they started excavating it, and the waterway, the raceway here, recently. So, DeWitt Clinton tells everyone that the first boat will pass into the Hudson at this place on the 8th of October, 1823. From 1823 forward until October 26, 1825, you could use the canal from the Hudson River all the way up to the base of the canal locks. Then you would portage your goods from there to Pendleton, where the creek would take you the rest of the way to Buffalo.
How would they portage them, like a wagon?
Wagon and
Horse and
horses,
yeah.
oxen, whatever was available. Interestingly, I don't think I put it in here. Sylvester Pendleton Clark, who was an anti-government squatter on Grand Island. He was vehemently anti-government. He was evicted from the island along with his other anti-government brethren, and they were given the choice by the U.S. Army to go to Canada or come to New York State, and they would pay their moving costs, basically, take them. Everybody else went to Canada. Clark decided that he's going to Niagara County, he's going to Pendleton. He figures there's no way the canal's ever going to be completed, so he buys all the property at the very end of the portage, saying everyone's going to have to go through me. It's going to be the great metropolis of Pendleton. They'll never finish the canal. I will own everything around here, and the government will owe me finally. He didn't win that argument. So on October 26th, 1825, they finally opened the canal from end to end. When they went to New York, they started in Buffalo, went all the way to the Hudson River and then down to New York City. Governor DeWitt Clinton poured water from Lake Erie into the East River down there. In, 1990, I worked on a movie that was written about Lockport that was never, never made.
Never produced.
When I went to New York City with my friend Scott and with the movie crew, and we reenacted this. We poured water into the East River in the middle of the night, which was the scariest thing ever, because we had a police guard. Because it's not the safest area to be in. Not everyone liked the canal. Lockport is the strangest looking place I ever beheld. It still kind of is. As fast as a half dozen trees were cut down, a factory was raised up. Stumps still contest the ground with pillars, and porticos are seen to struggle with rocks. It looks as if the demon of machinery, having invaded the peaceful realms of nature, had fixed on Lockport as the battleground on which they should strive for mastery. Nature is fairly routed and driven from the field, and the rattling, crackling, hissing, spitting demon has taken possession of Lockport forever. We slept there dismally enough. I never felt more out of humor at what the Americans call improvement. It is, in truth, as it now stands, a most hideous place, and gladly did I leave it behind me. Frances Trollope, mother of English novelist Anthony Trollope in 1832.
That was very nice.
When the first canal workers got here, there was literally nothing here. There were huge trees. When they enlarged the canal in the 1830s, 1840s, and 1850s, they were big piles of rock from the original canal still around. And right over by where Kenyon's Variety used to be, I think it's, it's a rental place now, over by Walnut and Transit, they found the stump of a black walnut tree that was 18 feet around. Parts of that stump are at City Hall. They saved it, but it was monstrously huge. So that's how big the trees were. There were snakes here. There were stones sticking up. The local natives refused to really inhabit this area. They thought it was cursed by demons because of all the snakes that were here.
I agree.
It was not a really
Rails
friendly
not a
place.
Were they those rails things? Yeah, they were, for rails and
Almost immediately, the canal was too small. It was originally dug to be 40 feet wide and 4 feet deep. So in 1834, they decided they were going to enlarge the canal, and they enlarged it to 70 feet wide and 7 feet deep. Some pretty views of the canal. That's near Rochester. That's Pittsburgh. In those early days, the canal looked like it was part of nature. There were two distinct ways of digging canals. The original 1825 canal was kind of an English style. They curved with the contour of the land and kind of made it as part of nature. When they enlarged it, it was a very German way, which was straight as possible, then turn. Which is how they cut 14 miles off the canal when they redug it. And then when they built the barge canal in the teens, they kind of did both of those. Instead of having the sharp turns, they had these long sweeping turns that looked a little more natural. So here's the enlarged canal. Below Lockport, it's a little bit wider than the 70 feet, by the way. It's almost 100 feet, and only 70 and 79 at the bottom. It's built on a prism. And in the deep cut, it's 62 feet wide, top and bottom. It's pretty much squared off. They had so much commerce here in Lockport, they wanted to have basically like a waiting pool, so they could have ships wait before they went up the locks or down the locks. That's why they're a little bit wider here. Same thing in Syracuse. They were a little bit wider than the rest of the state. So everyone's seen these pictures. There's the set of locks. There's a couple of lock tenders right there. And this one, this is the one you can see. That sign is still there. If you go out to the locks now, that sign is still there, telling you how to, warning. I might have a close-up in here. From the 1852 map, this is after they were enlarged. Thomas Evershed was the designer of the enlarged locks. The original locks were Nathan Roberts. There's Old City Hall right there, before they added on to it. Clearer look of kind of the same thing. You can see too the water running over the tops of the doors. That's how they kept water flowing in the bottom. If you go up and see how they do the locks now, the refurbished locks, they have water flowing over the top. That is exactly how they did it before. They always say they have water flowing, so it's not anything new. So when they say that they can't do the complete set of locks because of that, I like to show them that picture. Some more views. Tonawanda, this is Medina. Those are apples ready to go out to New York on the canal. That's a lot of apples.
A lot of barrels.
Yeah.
Cooper's was a big business.
Someone was asking about the lock photo earlier. Here's some lock tenders. See these things here, so you have footing to move these doors. They look monstrously huge. You think that you wouldn't be able to move them. They're so well balanced. As long as you had traction, it would take one person to open and close that door. They like to have more than one in case you had to, it swung back.
What year was that picture?
This one is before they changed the bridge out, so late 1800s. That's Pine Street Bridge over top of it. There you can see the water flowing over the top of the doors again, and a boat going up. This is going up the escarpment. So water is not coming over this door, so it's probably empty. And they're getting ready to go into this lock, and this one's full to match the upper one. More views of you can see the horses and mules. You know why they pulled with mules rather than horses? Anybody know why?
Better traction, and they could leave them alone and they keep
Sure-footed. And mules will not drink polluted water, horses will,
Right.
and the canal was definitely polluted. Anything, if it went through town, bedpans, anything you had went into the canal. And if you were a hoagie, the guy who ran the mules and horses, you had to keep the towpath clean behind you. So if there was road apples, you flung it into the canal. So you didn't drink out of the canal.
Sort of like the Niagara River now.
Yes, yeah. You have to wait through, it goes through a couple clarification. This is a hurry up boat. These guys would come along and fix any breaks that happened in the canal. There were a lot of breaks, especially in Orleans County. If you drive down on Van Buren Street, you'll see it too. The canal is a lot higher than the roadway on Van Buren Street. Well, sometimes on the north side of the canal, which is all fill, they dug from the south to the north. They would dig and push the land back this to the north, so the northern berm is all filled. They have to check it for leaks. They still do a guy that walks up and down in the summertime. Not as much as they used to. The last real guy retired probably about 10 or 12 years ago. But they still walk and check on. So these guys would fix those leaks that happen. There were lots of washouts, especially in the Albion area. If you read the newspapers, another washout in Albion, houses destroyed. It's a wall of water coming at you.
And there were earthquakes, yeah.
Thank God we don't have earthquakes here.
Minor ones.
Yeah.
But no.
We have major faults, but no earthquakes, thankfully.
Oh, so I have a question.
Yeah.
When they're with the tow ropes, do they, either directions, do they, when you're going against the current, do they release the horse off the rope and then like push their way through those locks, or do they keep the
They
horse?
pull the ropes coming up the locks.
Yeah.
And if you go out there today, there's railings, and you'll see divots in the railings and
Right.
divots in the stone from them pulling the
So they
boats
can keep
into.
them connected.
Right. On the way down, they would do what's called swell the locks. They leave just a little extra water in the upper lock, open the door, and it would push them into the next lock.
I see, yeah.
Lumber boats, that's going to be North Tonawanda. They're the lumber capital. They fought with Chicago through most of the 19th century as the lumber capital of the world. These are both in the same spot, though you probably wouldn't guess that. Anyone want to take a wild stab at where these are at? They're in the same general area. Well, above the locks, below the locks.
Oh, really?
This would be in Lockport. Chet's Doghouse would be right about
Oh.
here.
Yeah.
That's a Transit Street Bridge. And these are the mills down below the locks. Directly across would be the state yard for the canal. And so Mike Murphy's place is right over here. In fact, the ruins of this building are still there at the end of Mike's property. Mules. You had to get them on and off the boat. They didn't always like that. If you ever worked with mules, you'll know that they only like to do what they want to do. Now they're trying to get them back on the boat. This poor guy's pulling its tail. I just wait for those legs to come back and that guy to end up about here. So how do we get to this? This is what we see today. The old set of locks. This is a lot cleaner here now. The old set of locks and locks 34 and 35, New Pine Street Bridge, and all the buildings along there, City Hall there. They actually passed legislation in the 1890s to enlarge the canal. They were going to enlarge it to 95 feet wide and 9 feet deep, and they call it the $9 million mistake. $9 million was spent, almost no work was done. And it was stopped by act of legislature because there was nothing being done. There was a short depression in 1893-94, so they stopped the work. And it never really went any farther. And then Teddy Roosevelt, who used to be governor of New York, became president. And he wanted to make sure that his home state got the benefits of a larger canal. He was not initially for it, but he saw the money that the state had made over the years. So eventually it became legislation. And they started digging in 1908. So here is the differences between the eras of the canal. From 1825 to 1838, 40 feet wide, 4 feet deep, 363 miles long, 83 locks, 15 feet wide and 90 feet long, and 30 tons maximum per ship. On the enlarged canal from 1838 to 1918, 70 feet wide and 7 feet deep, 350 miles long, 72 locks, 18 feet wide and 110 feet long for each of those locks. And they went up eightfold in the tons. The barge canal, 123 feet wide, 12 feet deep. In the western end where we're at, it's 14 feet deep and 142 feet wide in the eastern end, which they still use daily for commerce, by the way. 348 miles long, 35 locks, which are 44.5 feet wide and 300 feet long, 3,000 tons maximum. GE is the #1 commerce on the canal. They have 2 factories near Schenectady, and they ship components back and forth all year long. And so they still use the canal.
During the winter?
It's not drained in the river parts.
Oh, yeah,
If they just had, I don't know if it was GE, I can't remember, but they had a big enlargement of the factory, and they had to use the canal because it was the cheapest to get these vessels.
Same thing with the Genesee beer.
Yeah.
They had those
Maybe that's
big,
what it was,
the
that
big
they
hop
were-
containers. Yeah, we went down.
They had to
They
get it down the canal because it was the best way.
They had a, you could follow those vats across the canal. They had cameras on the bridges as they were coming up through them. You could follow it on the internet. It was pretty wild. And we went out to, I guess we were just near Syracuse and took the family out to watch it. Because they're huge. They're really, really big. And it was the only way they could get them in. There was no way they'd fit onto the thruway and get under the overpasses and stuff. So they went through. I want to clear up an urban legend right now. The railroad bridge, the Green Street trestle, was not built upside down to impede canal traffic. In fact, it is the highest clearance on the entire canal of any bridge. The lift bridges right now are 15.5 feet off the water. The old high bridges, like they still have them in Medina, they have a high bridge, that's what I call them anyway. And what used to be the Lake Avenue Bridge, those were 22 feet off the water. The upside down bridge, the Green Street, New York Central Railroad Green Street Trestle, that's its official name, is 48 feet off the water. It is by 2 feet the highest bridge on the canal, the highest clearance. So canal boats through time, the first ones were only 30 tons, and as they started enlarging the canals, they got a little bit bigger. The 2 changes here from 75 to 100 tons to 240 tons was during the process of enlarging the canal. The whole canal wasn't dug from 4 feet to 7 feet at once. They dig down 4 feet to 6 feet, and 6 feet to 7 feet. That way they wouldn't impede canal traffic for the whole season. So that's why you see 3 different sets of tonnage on the ships. When they dug the canal for the barge canal, they had a lot of Italian and Polish workers that were working on the concrete. They had what was called Blue City. And this is the only picture I could find of Blue City. This is right out off of Bear Ridge Road, where they had barracks and stuff for the canal workers. And the reason they called it Blue City, there are 2 reasons why they call it Blue City. One of them was something to do with Poland and whatever workers they were, but the real reason they called it Blue City was it was within the blue lines of the canal. Blue lines of the canal are what the state owns. Even though if you have property that leads up to the canal, and you can have a dock on the canal, the state doesn't really care, but that's within the blue lines. They own it. They can tell you can take that. You have to take it out.
And this is the barge canal? In
Yes. Yep.
Really?
Do you know where that is on Bear Ridge? I'm just curious. I live in Pendleton. So.
It's really close. It's really close to the town line between the two of them, between Lockport and Pendleton.
That connection to Blue City come from the Blue Army?
That was one of what they said, but they called it Blue City because it was in the blue lines. Because there were blue cities in the 1860s also when they were enlarging the canal then, and there was no Polish workers then. So here we see This is the canal in the wintertime. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 boats. 9, there's one right there too. Sitting in the ice, waiting for spring to come. Same time, you can see there's a lot of snow here. This side of the canal, they're going to start rehabilitating, and this part's going to come out. That's the same picture as we saw before. There's Wide Waters, 1908.
That's huge.
It's one. There's an island too, so this has got to be. I could say it's at low tide.
Yeah.
Some of the machinery they used when they were digging the barge canal. What a messy job that must have been, because there was still water mostly in there. They did most of the work in the wintertime, again, so they didn't impede commerce on the canal. So that was wet and cold. They had railroad tracks right down in the canal bed, so they could pull these trains of dirt and stone out of there. You can see the tracks here. This is you can see this abutment here. That was they're building the Lake Avenue Bridge there. The canal below, this is where the state yard is. They're digging a trench here to enlarge the canal. The canal is actually right here on this other side. They have a berm set up here, and they're digging the canal, and it's frozen over here also. So they're using the weather to help them keep the dirt from just sliding in, because it's probably pretty swampy. This is out by Orangeport. Here's the canal. You can see they're digging here and enlarging it. So they would dig their large part of it and then knock down this berm. That way they keep the canal running on the other side throughout. North Tonawanda, they had a flood. You can see the ship, the boat got stuck under the bridge. They had to lift the bridge. I know from North Tonawanda knows the story, right? How they had to lift the bridge up to get that out of there, which is why they have the control dams. They can drop the canal water there pretty quickly, so that doesn't happen again. It damaged the bridge. That's Bolton Road. That bridge is now gone, and they're enlarging here. Enlarging at the locks. 1920, the work was all done by then. During the winter months, after they had completed the main part, they would go and do the small little jobs that took place that they couldn't do during the regular time. What they wanted to do was make it functional first, and then they would go and fine-tune everything. So even though 1918 is when the canal officially opened for the barge canal, they worked on it until 1922, especially at the locks. These are the first two ships through locks 34 and 35, right here. Even though the canal opened in 1918 across its entire length, this is November 17th, 1917. And there's snow on the ground. During World War I, and a little bit during World War II, the canal was considered to be a target of the enemy. So they were shipping boats and ships that were made out in the Great Lakes down the canal to get them out to New York City and Atlantic Ocean. All the bridges, all the locks, every place there was a canal, to do the canal, they had guards. So here's a guard right there guarding. Here's where City Hall is now. So this is right along the big bridge, guarding the locks to make sure no one tries to blow anything up to impede war traffic. Those are mighty big boats to fit in those locks. There's not much room on either side of those. 44.5 feet wide. I bet you those are 40 feet wide. There's not much room left at all. The Dave Peckinpah was the last purpose-built canal freighter. It was in Lockport for a few months when the state first got it, and now it's a museum down in near Troy. What is that? People's Island. In 1967 was the 150th anniversary of the canal. They had this canal boat go up and down the canal to celebrate. And remember this boat. I put a couple aerial views in. You can see exactly how big the big bridge is. It's pretty big. You don't realize it until you see it from the air how big it is. And the Triway Bridge is not much smaller. That's a pretty significant bridge also. There's a locks today. This, whenever I'm in this always kind of freaks me out. Waiting for that wall of water to come at me.
Why'd they make the big bridge that wide? They didn't need to make it that
There
wide.
used to be 2 bridges there,
Right.
and I'm not sure why they made it that way. There was the Saxon Street Bridge and the Cottage Street Bridge,
Right.
but I'm not sure why they did. They needed,
I know they need a bridge, but,
yeah.
yeah.
It used to be the widest single-span bridge in the world. It's not anymore, but it's in the top 5. Single span is the key. So, traces of the old Erie Canal. They are around. There is a sign in Holly that says the last known 1825 section of the canal west of Rochester. You're going to see that they're wrong. So, anyone know where the Niagara Orleans golf course is? The golf course is right over here. This bridge was just taken down. If you're going up to the bridge and you look off to the left, you can see this pond. This pond is about 70 feet wide and is probably, it's pretty long. That is the trace of the old canal. When they went from when they started the 1918 canal, they actually abandoned part of it. There was a kind of a curve there. And I have maps, you'll see where the curves were. This is the 1868 map. This right here, and you see the blue line. This is the blue line I was talking about earlier that the state owns. This right here is the 1825 canal. This is the 1838 canal right here. So this is Lockport, Royalton Town Line.
That's how they lost those miles.
Yes,
They
yes.
shortened it.
So if you know where Floyd Snyder used to live in the town of Lockport at Canal and Harrington Road, this is his house over here, this is his driveway, this is the original 1825 canal. And on the other side of the street, you can see part of the 1838 prism. It is the only place on the entire canal you can see all 3 distinct eras of the canal. Now in Pendleton, and we're going to go back to Pendleton Clark here for a minute. The old canal, if you can still see it, they call it the state ditch now. If you're driving along Canal Road, on the one side of the road is a big ditch there. That is actually part of the old 1825 canal. Old canal swings around this way into Tonawanda Creek. The canal runs this way, and even when they enlarged it later, since the deep cut's up here, they kept that same basic line right here. Sylvester Pendleton Clark, who bet his fortune that everyone had to go through his portage. To add insult to injury, after he's proven wrong, he's buried in the Clark Family Cemetery, which is on the banks of the old canal. And you could, this is hard to see, but right here, you just see it right there, is the bank of the 1825 canal, and it runs right through here, and this building blocks it, but there's another little thing right here, and they've leveled it out right here, but the canal came through here and that big curve that we saw in the last one. And I went traipsing through people's backyard to get these pictures, by the way. So this, I'm standing on what would be the berm side, not the tow side of the canal. So the tow path would be on the other side, but this right here is where the canal would be. So, canal bridges, they all had names. We'll go quickly through the town of Royalton. Vernon Street, Middleport Lift Bridge. Williams Bridge was on Carmen Road, named for John Williams, and we're going to go over a little bit about these people. Watson's Bridge is on Peet Street, named for Israel Watson. Hurd's Bridge is Wruck Road. Rinalds Basin Bridge is on Slight and Settlement. And I didn't realize this, so I was doing this program. Telegraph Road is actually before the canal, and it was all Slight and Settlement. I didn't know that. Slight and Settlement used to run all the way to the county line. But when they put the canal through, it split, and they called one side Slight and Settlement, the other side is Telegraph Road. Maybe's Bridge at Bolton Road. I don't know why she put Bolton Road on that one. Kate put this together for me because I can't make it look that pretty. It was named after Marcus Mabie, Orangeport Highway Bridge, Orangeport, which was named after a barn that was orange, by the way. So Davis Hurd was one of the guys. He was born in Arlington, Vermont, April 12, 1788. He married Amanda Turner in 1811, then moved to Scipio. He was appointed an engineer on the Erie Canal, and when he finished that job, he went to Farmington Canal in New Haven, Connecticut. 1828, he returned to Niagara County in the town of Royalton. They built a bridge, and they named it Hurd's Bridge for him, because he was an engineer and knew what was going on. He assisted with improvements to the Genealogical Canal in York County, Pennsylvania in 1840. Supervised lock construction during the canal enlargement here in Lockport. It was Evershed's design, but he was the guy in charge of making sure that it went well. 1836, Hurd was elected to the New York State Assembly and served 3 terms. Was a supervisor of the town of Royalton, presidential elector in 1840. Originally a Whig, he became a vehement anti-slavery Republican, and he died in 1868. So when you're going down I don't think there's a bridge there anymore. A lot of these bridges are gone. Rinal's Basin, George Rinal, he was born in Pennsylvania in 1794. 1806, his father died, so he moved to New Jersey and lived with his uncle. And he learned a trade there, which he completely abandoned once he decided to set out on his own and went into the dry goods business. He started dealing lumber in 1825, where his house is. Right about, anyone know where John Hall lives? It's right there. That's where he was at. In 1838, he moved from there and went to Lockport, and he made his lumber business even bigger. He was a sheriff of Niagara County for 3 years and was the postmaster of Lockport, appointed by the president. He died in May of 1862 and is buried at Cold Springs Cemetery, that is a great picture of Cold Springs, by the way. Bolton Road was named after Jonathan and Marcus Mabie. Marcus Mabie was the son of Colonel Jonathan Mabie. Jonathan was born in Little Falls, New York, came to Royalton in 1810. If you're driving down Slade and Summit, you see that little dam over there. It's right about where he lived. He purchased property on Slade and Settlement Road near the 18-mile creek. Built the first grist mill in the area. There's a sawmill across the street. He died walking on the top of his dam. Fell off and he died. His son Marcus took over. Marcus was born in Royalton in 1827. He took up the milling business, and he operated a stone quarry north of the canal. When I first read this, they go, north of the canal? The quarry is south of the canal. And Jesse Bieber, the town of Royalton historian, said, no, if you go back behind where the mill ruins are, there's this low area that's kind of always filled with water and overgrown. That was a quarry. I had no idea. You can see it really clearly on Google Maps. So I had to go through and verify. Well, Jesse's good anyway, so I had to see it for myself. That was a rainy day a couple weeks ago. I had to go exploring. And the police didn't come this time.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
how far away was that from Mirror Lake? You
Mirror
know
Lake
what
was
Mirror
over on
Lake is?
31, was it, right?
Pardon?
Mirror Lake was over by where the Lafarge quarry is now. This was way over.
No, Mirror Lake was close to the canal. But I'm not sure. I thought it was off of Bolton Road, according to what I could find on the internet.
What we called Mirror Lake when we were kids was that area right there below the what do you call it? But what's her name? I see her sneaking around back there. She might know where Mirror Lake is, right?
Yeah, my sister used to take us there, and there was a big.
Yeah, I'm
sign.
pointing at you.
Me?
Yeah,
Oh,
We're making a Bolton Road.
yeah.
Would you swim there?
on the north side of the canal or south side of the canal?
South side.
South
Okay.
side,
This was on the north side.
between 31 and the canal.
Pointing at you.
I remember the boat board that showed a woman diving into
Really?
Mirror Lake.
I'll have to
It was
check
there
that
for
out.
Years.
When we were kids, we were told that Mirror Lake was, you know where the limestone kiln is on 31? Right, you know where Lafarge is,
Yeah.
where they had the overpass, now it's Niagara Metals?
Yeah.
There's a body of water there, and we were told that was Mirror Lake, but
Oh, okay.
yeah. It's like people that don't know where Rattlesnake Hill is.
Yeah.
It was down there.
Millard's Bridge is at Harrington Road and Canal Road. I'm named after Oliver Millard. These are the town of Lockport ones. Wakeman's Bridge was Day Road. Young's Bridge was Cold Springs Road. Hitchens and Summit Street is the bypass. And Haycock's or Riley's Bridge is at Robinson. The city of Lockport's got their own names and they're on their own little thing here. But Millard's Bridge, Oliver Leonard Millard was born in 1793 in Hampton, Washington County, New York, was a private in the War of 1812. He married Deborah Seeley in 1817. He moved to Lockport and owned a farm at Millard's Bridge. They just tore down the house where his original house was. It was not his original house, but that's where his house was. Right across the street from Floyd Snyder's farm.
Oh, yeah.
I think this summer they may have torn that house down.
Yes.
It was recent. He was elected a commissioner in the Lockport Common Schools in 1836. I don't know why. Well, she's got two different ones on here. In 1877, he died. He's buried at the Orangeport Cemetery. His stone is unreadable. Mike Neathy lifted that stone and took that picture for Find a Grave. But it's virtually unreadable. You can barely tell that's what it is. But that's the man who the bridge was named after. Stephen Young, oh, these are great. This is a great story. Born in Rhode Island about 1810, purchased land from A.N. Brown in the vicinity of Cold Springs in 1842. The canal bridge next to his farm was named for him. He died in 1887 under mysterious circumstances. Hence the cow. He was walking a cow along the canal. Half an hour after he was last seen, he was found dead with his head in a foot of water. The initial thought was that the cow had taken off and dragged the old man into the water where he drowned. The coroner's inquest determined that congestion of the brain, a stroke, killed him rather than drowning. I had to go get to the coroner's reports and verify what happened, because we do have some of those, and we actually have the 1887 coroner's inquest. And I had to look at it, and they spent 3 days studying his body to determine how he died. So they think that he had a stroke, fell, hit his head, drowned in the water, and that the cow took off. No idea if they got the cow back. He and his wife Margaret were buried in the Cold Springs Cemetery, overlooking the land that they once called home. Stephen and Solomon Wakeman. Here's Day Road, so that's where we just saw. And you can see Wakeman and Wakeman and Wakeman. And there's Young's. She's got them in here backwards. Sorry about that. So Day Road is where Wakeman's Bridge is. Young's Road is at Cold Springs. This is why I should just do my own work. The two brothers came to Niagara County in 1809 and 1810. It's unclear which one came first, because the land records say S. Wakeman and then S. Wakeman. But one brother came first. They settled just east of Cold Springs Cemetery. They purchased property in Section 11, Lot 8. Section 11, Lot 8. Big lot right there. They own considerable lands along the west side of Day Road on both sides of the Erie Canal. Stephen Wakeman was born in Connecticut in 1761, served in the American Revolution, enlisted in 1781 in Fairfield, Connecticut, served for 1 year. He was engaged in a skirmish at Green's Farm in Connecticut. There's actually a big write-up about that. It was an extraordinarily minor skirmish, but there are volumes written on this because who was involved, apparently. Captain Nash was well known, and he was from Green's Farm, so everybody who has the last name Nash or other spelling of it has written a book about their ancestors. There's lots written on Green's Farm skirmish. He was elected the first overseer of the poor in Niagara County in 1812, died in September 1852 at Lockport, is buried in Cold Springs Cemetery. He was buried in land that he donated. He donated the land for Cold Springs Cemetery. There were earlier burials on this cemetery. I don't know if she's got it in here at the end of this or not. The first burial was of a guy who ran the tavern. Around 1812, 1813, he died, and they buried him on their farm. And so the oldest cemetery burials at Cold Springs probably are no longer marked. They don't probably know exactly where they're at, but they started the cemetery as a family cemetery and then donated the land to the association. Solomon Wakeman was born in Connecticut, 1780. He was 11 years younger than his brother. Blazed a trail in 1809 to what became Cold Springs Cemetery. Built a cabin where Larry Hasley's stone schoolhouse is on 77. His son Edward, born in 1810, is considered to be the first white baby born in the current boundaries of the town of Lockport. In 1817, and we're going to talk about this one when we get to the city of Lockport, because there's a lot of confusion about this. In 1817, he and Nathan Rogers, the guy who built the first locks here, cleared land and built a log cabin for, it says, Nathaniel and Jehiel Comstock. Right about where the Oddfellows, the original home was, where the grape was grown. They built a cabin for him there. In the Wakeman diaries, which we have partial diaries, it says that Jehiel Comstock was an aged man, and so they built a cabin for him. If you go to the Comstock history that's on that the city has, they say it was Nathaniel Comstock, who was about 30, not an aged man. And Nathaniel was one of the 5 brothers who came. So there's discrepancy on who Jehiel Comstock was, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I believe, going through the Wakeman diaries, that evidence tends to lead towards Jehiel, who was probably 67, 68 at the time that this was built for him. I would say that would make him an aged man, not 30-year-old Nathaniel. But both names show up in both records. Solomon, they had massive differently spelling for his name. He went to Lucas County, Ohio in 1818, and he went prospecting in Michigan, fell ill, came home, and died. He was buried in Ohio. His wife said, "I hate Ohio. I have no family here." She came back, and she returned to the homestead on Chestnut Ridge Road, and she died in 1823, buried at Cold Springs. Another one of those early burials. We have no idea where they're buried. Because the earliest marked burials in the 1830s there. That didn't become a cemetery association until like 1840. So there were definitely bodies there probably for nearly 30 years before it became an actual Cold Spring cemetery. They called it Pleasant Farms. If you run across in cemetery, in old records say Pleasant Farms, they're talking about Cold Springs. Everybody knows this house. No, it looks great, doesn't it?
Yes.
Francis Hitchens was born in 1802, Cornwall, in England. In 1832, arrived in the United States, was planning on going to Montreal to start his glass business. Instead, ended up here in 1833, opened and operated Lockport Glass Works, which was over here on Green Street. And he had a sash and blind manufacturing. He's probably best known for the house he owned at Summit and State Streets, and while there's probably 50 years of historical articles that say he built the house, he did not. It was built by Joseph Pound between 1832 and 1835. Again, that came from diaries. Pound's diaries, we have partial diaries of his, and he talks about building the house. And if you look at the land records, the land there for where the house was sold from the from Willem Willink, which is the Holland Land Company, to Pound for $500. Pound sold it to George Renal from Renal's Basin for $550. Renal gave it up at auction so he could buy other land, and it was bought by, I can't remember who the next person was, but then when the Pound owned it again, then all of a sudden, when he sells it to Hitchens, it's $3,500. That tells you that the house was built before Hitchens had the house. They had the property. You don't jump $3,000 in assessment and you don't have a house on it. Elish Heacock, he owned, you can see where his wife had a property. This is Pendleton, this is Lockport, so it's right at the town line. Not much is known about him. I searched for probably a couple weeks looking through everything that I could find on Elish Heacock. I thought it was Alicia. It's not Elish, is what it is on all the paperwork. He sold his land in 1839 after he bought it only 4 years before to Horace Heacock, who was not his son. It may have been a brother or a nephew, but then sold it to Alicia Jr., even though it's Elish, in 1848. That's definitely his son. Names in 19th century are arbitrary the way you spell your name. The city of Lockport, Comstock's Bridge, was known as Lake Avenue Bridge, and everything else is pretty much the same. Katy Street Bridge. Anyone know where Katy Street Bridge was? Where Mike Murphy's place is. There was a footbridge that went across, and where Upson Park is, there was a little street there called Katy Street, and they crossed the canal so they could go from one side to the other. Henry Cady owned a boat works, and so you can go from one side of the bridge to the canal to the other. So here we go with Jehiel or Nathaniel. He was likely related to the Comstock family that founded the village. He came from the same area that the rest of the Comstocks did. He was born in Connecticut about 1750, served in the Revolutionary War in the McClellan's regiment. In 1817, Jehiel, an aged man, was built a log cabin on property near the old Oddfellows home on Lake Avenue by Solomon Wakeman and Nathaniel Rogers. Later he moved to Royalton where he died around 1832. About 1820 he moved out of that cabin, went to Michigan, no idea what he was doing in Michigan, and then suddenly shows back up in 1830, living with family members, and he died in 1832, and they believe he's buried at the Mountain Ridge Cemetery, the Green Family Cemetery. Comstock is a huge name in Lockport. Zenas and I try to remember all their names. I had them all memorized earlier today. There's a Nathaniel, Zeno, Darius. Darius is the one, by the way, who sold the land at the head of the locks and moved his property out to Harrison's and then moved away. But they were related somehow. Comstocks are a huge name, and I want to find out more about this Jehiel Comstock and how he fits in, because I'm pretty sure he's the one that they built the cabin for. When I look up Nathaniel Comstocks, and Comstock family has a huge genealogical site. There are no Nathaniels who would be aged and be in Lockport at the right time to be built a cabin. But there's this Jehiel. And in handwriting, Nathaniel is N apostrophe I-E-L or I-A-L. That's Nathaniel. Jehiel is J apostrophe I-E-L or I-A-L. So very easy to mix the two up. I'm hoping it's this guy because he's got an incredible story with his Revolutionary War experience. I didn't include it in here because I didn't think I was going to have time. Henry Franklin Cady, the Katy Street Bridge. This is the railroad bridge, and Cady's boatyard was down here. Ended up becoming Finn's boatyard later. So there's the dry dock is right about here today. You know where the dry dock is down in Upson Park? From about that dry dock, straight across the canal to where Mike Murphy's was the Katy Street Bridge. He moved to Lockport in 1844. As a child, he moved to Illinois after being born in Connecticut. He knew both Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas. We have letters between the three of them. He was a boat builder with a business located below the locks. A canal bridge across the canal in the present-day Upson Park was where his boatyard was located. He served as chief engineer of the Lockport Fire Department for 3 years, was despised universally as the head of the fire department. I'm doing a book on the history of the fire department, and I've read from the Republican paper and the Democratic paper not nice things about the way he ran the fire department. But at the end, when he finally retired, it was, "We thank you for your service, you've done a great job." He was undersheriff during the terms of Sheriff Theodore Stone and Alicia Clapp. So between 1851 and 1854, he was second in command at the Sheriff's Department for Niagara County. He was president of the Board of Supervisors, postmaster of Lockport for several years. I would gather that he was postmaster somewhere between 1861 and 1865, since he knew Abraham Lincoln, and it took a presidential appointment then to become a postmaster. So I would guess that's when it was, but it's not clear in the records. He outlived his wife and 4 or 5 children. He died in 1905 and is buried at Glenwood. Town of Pendleton has a couple of bridges. Hawley's Bridge, which you would assume would be named after Jesse Hawley, and everyone I spoke to said it's absolutely named after Jesse Hawley. Named after James and George Hawley, who bought property at both ends of the bridge from the Holland Land Company and controlled both ends of the bridge until they finally moved away. The Sulphur Springs Bridge no longer exists. There's a little path there now that goes to the Canalway Trail. It was where they used to have the guard gate before they moved it for the barge canal. The Pendleton Bridge at Tonawanda Creek, the New Home Bridge, which is Campbell Boulevard, and Pickard's Bridge at Bear Ridge Road, which is named after Lawrence Pickard.
I just went to the town recently and he just gave me an old map that has the Pickard, like the old, I'm trying to look at.
They actually called that area Pickardsville.
Did they? Because
Yes.
it was like, he was showing me the names, he was the building guy, and I'm
Yep.
looking at it going, just the names of the roads, because I live what used to be Sour Home, it's, and they showed the whole canal and the old way it looked.
I showed a couple photos out of there of the map book that we had that shows the old canal and the enlarged canal. That book was invaluable doing the research for where the old parts of the canal were in the county. And it shows all the property owners. It showed who the property was purchased from and how much they gave. The state bought the property. They took 0 land in the enlargement for eminent domain. Now in 1908 when they started, that's a different story.
Craig,
Yeah.
what year was that again, when the state was buying the property up?
Between 1838 and 1840 is when they bought most of it. That's when they enlarged the canal. None of it taken in eminent domain. They actually paid
But
fair market
nothing
value.
later?
They did. That was the main part of it, though. When they got to 1908 and they were buying property for the barge canal, the canal we have there today, it was not quite as nice. There was a lot of you're moving, and whether you like it or not. George and James Hawley purchased land where the canal bridge was located in 1833 and 1836. They owned property on both sides of the canal at the ends of the bridge. Some of the notes I have from Joshua Wilbert, one of the greatest historians ever for this local area. He's fantastic. For 70 years, he wrote down everyday happenings around the area. We have 19 volumes of his writing that is unindexed.
Here's a nice project for you.
We have someone starting to work on it. And so some of the stuff I did find in some of his writing, they thought they owned the bridge and they were put in their place. Lawrence and Albert Pickard. Lawrence Pickard was born in Sullivan, Madison County, New York, 1798. Arrived in Pendleton in 1816 with his father Hartman. Settled on land on both sides of Tonawanda Creek where Bear Ridge crosses into Amherst. He was named road commissioner in 1827, elected town supervisor 1833 to 1839, and again in 1847. And he died in 1861. His son Albert was born in 1835. He also served as supervisor and was elected to the New York State Assembly 4 times, 1863, 64, 65, and 1867. They had 1-year terms then, I'm not sure why. He was also sheriff of Niagara County in 1887 and 1890. He died in Wilson in 1920. I can't determine whether he's buried at Greenwood or not. It does not say in his death record. There is one bridge in the town of Wheatfield. It's Bush's Bridge. Named after a family in Amherst, and when I called Amherst historian, they could give me no information. So sometimes you run into brick walls when you're trying to.
I can give you information on it. I have pictures of it.
I have pictures of the bridge.
Okay.
I'm just looking for more information
Well,
on the
the
family.
homestead,
Go ahead.
the homestead was right next to it. So when they took pictures with the mule teams, the bridge was in the background.
There was, I'm not sure if there's a connection, but there's a gentleman, his name is Peter Bush, and he has a ton of history on the Pendleton site, and I'm not sure if it's related, but it's all,
I'll have to check that out.
he's related, we have common great-grandparents.
Do you know, I can tell you right where this bridge was. Do you know if you come up Tonawanda Creek Road after you cross over at Pickard's Bridge, you come up to Niagara Falls Boulevard, and you can cross over the boulevard and the road curves around behind all those businesses, that's Old Falls Boulevard there, or whatever they call it now. There used to be a bridge that would go straight across the canal right there. And that's where it was. The scariest bridge I ever crossed was that wooden monstrosity on Cold Springs Road.
Bush's Bridge was pretty cool.
And then the other one was when I was learning to drive, when you went over the Lake Avenue Bridge, the Comstock Bridge, and you had to make that sharp turn to get under the old railroad pillars to go over to Reed's. That was scary too, because the cars in the 1980s, I had a 1982 Cutlass Supreme, they weren't small.
No, they were big, big wide cars.
And that's me. Josephine, Corliss, Idalina, and Patience. Twins, they're 13 now, she's 11, and she'll be 8th in December. Another awesome December birthday. I've known for a long time that the bridges were not named after roads. I never, until Carol asked me about doing a project on this, I had no idea what the genealogy could be behind some of the names of the bridges. So this was really cool
That's great,
for me to
thank
do.
you. Yeah, awesome. You're welcome to join us for refreshments and certainly talk with Craig personally about any questions you might have. So come on up.